Hello and welcome back as we continue in our study of what is sound doctrine and the fact that God has given us patterns to follow. This week we're going to be focusing on God's pattern for worship in the New Testament. We're going to be focusing in John chapter 4, where Jesus was speaking to the Samaritan woman at the well. Notice as we start reading in verse 20. So John 4 verse 20. Where the woman asked Jesus, "Our fathers worshipped in the mountain, and you people say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, an hour is coming when neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship that which you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews." Verse 23. "For an hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipper will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For such people the Father seeks to be his worshippers. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." So Jesus was having this religious discussion with this Samaritan woman, and worship came up. Now the Samaritans didn't go down to Jerusalem to worship. They worshipped in a place called Mount Gerizim. Jesus was pointing that under the Old Testament, Jerusalem was the place. But he pointed towards the New Testament. And he said a time is coming, and now is, when God demands that people worship in spirit and truth. Notice again in verse 24, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. Here we see Jesus telling us that there is a pattern, and in the New Testament we can see the pattern for worship. Now let's notice this verse. God is spirit, and we understand that. God is not, he does not have flesh and blood. He is a spiritual being, an eternal being, if you like. And those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. Well, from this, we understand that we must worship. God demands that we worship him. This is one of the commands of God. But he tells us how to worship. He says, in spirit and truth. Now, many people get confused by this word spirit. It's exactly the same word earlier in the verse where it says God is spiritual. We need to realize that our worship is spiritual. It is our spirit worshipping God our Father. But not only is it to be spiritual, but it also is to be done in truth. Now this is important that we understand this, because this is where it comes into the pattern. In John chapter 17 and verse 17, in Jesus' high priestly prayer, Jesus says, "Thy word is, sanctify them in truth. Thy word is truth." It's in the New Testament that we find the truth. And it's in the New Testament that we find how we need to worship. This is where the pattern for worship is. There are 5 aspects of worship that we're asked to partake in. There's the teaching. There's prayer. There's singing. There's the giving. And there's the Lord's Supper. Now, we live in a world today where people have added and taken away from all 5 of those aspects. They've changed how the Bible teaches. The teaching has to be done. Prayer has become changed as well. Singing, they've added musical instruments where they never are found in the New Testament. The giving is done. This wealth and prosperity doctrine is just changed all of that. And the Lord's Supper, they've changed that in so many ways. There's even groups that gather together and they use Coca-Cola and cake instead of the fruit of the vine and unleavened bread. Now, the Bible tells us in all of these 5 aspects how to worship. We must worship in spirit and truth. Now, if we want to be pleasing to God, we've got to follow the pattern. We cannot add, we cannot take away from the Word of God, but we've got to follow what God says. Now, The point of this passage in John chapter 4 was that these people, the Samaritans, had gone away from serving God, gone their own way and sought their own way to serve him. And that's not good enough. Today, under the new covenant, we must worship God in spirit and in truth. Well, our time's up, and I thank you once again for being with us. Please, if you have any questions, put them in the comment sections below, and we'll get right back to you. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye for now.